It's the Fulhamish podcast, your independent voice of Fulham FC. My name's Sammy James. Welcome to the show. Today, it's the Thursday Club looking ahead to our game against Tottenham away on Saturday. We'll also look back on Saturday's victory over Sunderland, and I'm joined on the show today by Jack Collins. Hello.
Hello, Sammy. How you doing?
Good, thank you. I feel like after a lot of weeks of having different guests, and it's been really fun, we're back to basics today.
Yeah.
Sammy and Jack chewing the fat.
Back to the old guard for a week or two. It's nice. Like, we've had such brilliant guests on over the last couple of weeks. But sometimes it's just nice to sit back and be like, right, okay, we can just dissect it in a little bit more detail, get some emails done, you know, the admin corner, if you will, on the Thursday Club.
Exactly. And Hugh Grant cancelled at late notice.
Yeah, I mean, look, I wasn't going to mention it, but fair enough.
Bit annoying. No, I'm joking. One day, HG will appear on the Thursday Club. Jack, let's discuss Sunderland first of all from Saturday. Let's have the final word. Obviously, we discussed it a lot. If you want to listen for the full analysis, go back and check out the podcast with myself, Sarah, Dom, and Drew. And also, there's the Jack and Joe show, which was brilliant, and you can watch that on YouTube and also listen to it on the podcast feed. But yeah. Be nice to just get your kind of final word from the game on Saturday. I feel like I've spoken about it a lot. I did the quick take and the pod. I mean, I think ultimately you got to look at it pretty positively. This is a good Sunderland team that are playing really well in the league this year. And we won convincingly.
Yeah, it's always good.
We won convincingly in terms of it was a convincing performance. It wasn't a convincing scoreline.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's always good to knock off a title challenge at home, I think, is the...
I think you can put the title challenge to bed after Saturday.
We finished off Sunderland's title challenge, and look, you can't take those kind of things lightly. No, but in terms of... I watched this game from Portugal, which was a bit of a strange one. It's obviously a little bit easier to watch the 3 p.m. kickoffs when you're abroad. And it meant I could just sort of sit down and actually watch it as opposed to being quite wrapped up in it. And there was a lot of hyperbole being thrown around after the game, I thought, about, you know, where Fulham were and how things were working. I thought we were fine, if I'm being honest. I didn't think it was a brilliant performance. I thought it was a little bit loose at times. I thought we looked so much improved on what we saw at Everton. Obviously, that it's easy to kind of make the comparison and be like, we were really good. I don't think Fulham hit loads of heights in the game. I think that obviously whilst there were opportunities and we should have done better with a couple of them, that Kevin opportunity in the first half, which actually, I mean, I think in the ground would have looked like he fluffed it a little bit. It is a really good save from Robin Roofs to get down low to that strike.
It was also further out than I realised.
Yeah. I mean, look, there's the Harry Wilson chance in the second half, which I think is more difficult than the one he hits in the first half, but he's in a kind of better shooting position, if you will. We came close a number of times. I thought that Sunderland were abysmal, and part of that was the fact that they just didn't seem to show up. The five at the back didn't really work for them. Granit Xhaka was anonymous in the middle of the park, and part of that is that Fulham didn't really allow them to get into their stride or execute any sort of game plan, which has been difficult for pretty much everyone against Sunderland over the course of this season. So it's worth giving credit, I think, for the way that Marco set up, the way that he tried to stifle them, and the way that we looked to pick apart Sunderland's defensive shape on the wings in particular, with the two wingers drifting off. I thought that Cess was excellent in both elements of this game. I thought in terms of going forward, beforehand, when it was Kevin there, the way that he overlapped on that left-hand side, and then, you know, once Samu Chukwueze came out to that left-hand side, you know, picking up those underlapping runs. There's a brilliant piece on the Fulhamish website by Dan Cook about the way that Sessegnon has evolved and adapted his game. But I did pick that out in the game and thinking, okay, what we're seeing there is the two different sides of Ryan Sessegnon. He can, you know, both take it round the outside and find those little pockets on the inside as well. So I thought that was a massive positive. I thought the midfield was really good. I thought that the Sanderberger and Alex Iwobi worked really nicely together again. And interestingly, given that Alex Iwobi is a less defensive option than Sasha Lukic potentially is, I thought it was interesting that Sanderberger seemed to step more into the game, you know, getting shots away, trying to open up passing lanes. He actually almost felt like he had more license to get forward and try and impact the game as well, which I thought was interesting, given that you would naturally assume that having a more defensively minded partner would open that situation up. But yeah, it didn't turn out to be the case. Obviously, there was a frustration around Fulham not putting our chances away and that kind of feeling that we might get done with a sucker punch. But it never really materialised for Sunderland. You know, there was a couple of opportunities. Bertrand Traore drags one into Bernd Leno's hands in the first half. Enzo Lefebvre whistles one wide at the start of the second half.
Yeah.
But I thought overall, We kept Sunderland really well and nicely in check. And even the changes that Regis Lebris made in terms of, bringing Brian Brobby on and Shamsuddin Talbi, who I think are wonderful footballers, didn't really impact Fulham's ability to deal with any sort of attacking game plan that Sunderland had. So I thought defensively really strong. Attacking wise, I think it left a little bit to be desired, not just in terms of putting the ball in the back of the net, but opening up clear-cut chances. But ultimately, I thought we got what we deserved.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to kind of press you on, Jack, is home form versus away form. Drew wrote a really interesting article on the Fulhamish website about Fulham starting to rely on their home form this season. The away form has been pretty abysmal. Just 1 out of our 14 points is away from home. That was on the opening day against Brighton. And he drew some interesting comparisons, which we can come on to seasons gone by. This used to be Fulham's kind of DNA, rock solid at home, pretty terrible away, and that's changed in recent years. And it's the first time I can really remember supporting Fulham in the last 2 or 3 seasons where Fulham have been really competitive away from home. I almost just knew it as part of the course that Fulham do not win Premier League games away from home, and Marco's changed that, but it's been a bit of a reversal to that. Like, the results at home are really good when you take into account that the only games where we haven't picked up maximum points has been that draw against Manchester United, which, I think was an okay result, and then a defeat to Arsenal, which also wasn't even a hammering in itself.
No.
We were competitive in that game too. Yeah, away from home, we've been pretty feeble and pretty awful at times. And I know that there are other clubs in the Premier League also experiencing life being tough away from home. Newcastle are not very good away from home.
No, they're not.
Brentford have been poor away from home. We've talked a lot of this season about trends. Is this maybe something that we're going back to as well, that maybe the Premier League is getting harder away from home? Whereas in recent seasons, it's felt like, particularly after COVID, it almost felt like away wins were much more common throughout the league.
You say that, but there was a point at half-time, in the 3:00 fixtures on Saturday where no home team was winning. I don't think any home team had scored a goal, and so there are rules and there are exceptions. I think from a Fulham perspective in particular, the mannerism of games just suits us far better at home at the moment, right? And look, I've talked before about the fact that I think that this Premier League season, and the way that the actual trends are forming in terms of set pieces, the transitional play, etc., doesn't necessarily play into Fulham's hands. I don't think it particularly suits us. I don't think it suits what we want to do, especially when we're missing Rodrigo Muniz, because we don't have that ability to kind of cut teams open in transition. And look, this is not new either. We go back a few years, and you remember talking about Fulham's inability to counterattack, right? Like we sat here and discussed the fact that Fulham were really struggling to put goals away in games that we didn't have much of the ball. And I think that at home, Fulham tend to dominate possession, tend to dictate the terms of the game a little bit more, and teams are struggling to be able to impose a game plan on us. That's exactly what happened in the Sunderland game at the weekend. The flip side of that is that I think away from home, we're far less able to put our stamp on games. Now, whether that's mental or whether that's just something to do with the pitches being different or whatever is a separate point. But I don't think Fulham's style translates when we don't have much of the ball. We're not a particularly good team when we have 40% possession, right? And at home, we're much more likely to be able to sit down and dominate, and especially against the teams that we've played at home, right? Like, and I take your point on Arsenal, Manchester United, but you actually look at the other games at home, they're all winnable fixtures, if you will, right? Like, they're all games I think that we would have expected to win. And I remember talking about the Everton game and being like, this is the first one you're looking at and saying, yeah, I'd probably be expecting a point. Maybe that's unfair. Maybe that's not doing Everton a service considering how good they've been at Hill Dickinson. But generally, I think that was the first one I was like, oh, don't like that very much, because that feels like a game that Fulham should have been fighting for. And the fact that the performance was the way it was is perhaps more frustrating than the result. But I think Everton dictated the terms of that game. I think against Sunderland, we dictate the terms of the game. And away from home, I find it interesting that we can't seem to put our stamp on it in the same kind of way that we can at home. I don't necessarily think that's a purely Fulham problem, but I do think that we are less adaptable, perhaps, than other teams in terms of varying our style to mix and match it with certain teams, especially given the injuries that we have right now. And that might be playing into this as a kind of theme. Yeah, and you are right that actually just the way the fixtures have fallen, we've had some good, nice, quite kind home fixtures, and actually think about all the away games that we've played, and
I mean, to be honest, what isn't a tough game in the Premier League away from home other than maybe the current bottom three? What is there?
Even still, like, I think that, going to Turf Moor, which we'll obviously experience in a couple of weeks, going to Ellen Road, I don't think they're going to be easy fixtures.
No.
But I think that, the truth is, I think, about the Premier League this season, it's weird because I was thinking about this from a Villa perspective as opposed to from a Fulham one, but it is worth kind of pointing out. When Villa won against Leeds on Sunday, they went fourth for a brief period in the Premier League. I was watching it being like, how are Villa fourth? Villa have played well for about 270 minutes maximum of the entire season. And that's not really a criticism because finding ways to win in difficult circumstances is a good sign. And Unai Emery is a master of actually doing that. But considering the run they went on at the start of the season, and considering I don't think that they've actually performed that brilliantly, the Bournemouth game, they were excellent. I thought they did well defensively against City. I think they were great against Leeds. You look at it and think, they're fourth. How has that kind of come to pass over the course of the season? And the fact is that the table is so congested all the way through that it feels like jumps are being made left, right and centre. And I do think that it feels like a more competitive league. That is partly because the promoted sides feel far more invested within it. The fact that a couple of sides had bad starts, but have sort of bounced back now, West Ham and Nottingham Forest in that category. And you're looking at it and thinking, okay, how does that end up shaking out? Well, I wonder if it means that, come February, March, we're still in a period where obviously the table will concertina out a little bit, but we're still in a period where a win could bring you up 2-3 places every time that you play football. I wouldn't be shocked if we're still experiencing that kind of thing within the course of the season when it comes to the latter end of it.
Yeah, and one other point from Drew's article that I wanted to touch upon was going back in time to look at seasons where we only won one game away from home. Because as I say, this really was like a part...
Self-harm nostalgia.
Yeah, a little bit. It really was kind of part and parcel of Fulham. We were so good at home. We won so many games at Craven Cottage and it saved us season after season after season. And then we were horrendous away from home. And this, I think, started under Coleman and very much continued through the kind of the Sanchez into Roy years. Obviously, 05-06, we won away at Manchester City, I think, penultimate game. We would have won 2 games possibly away from home had it not been for the Sunderland snowstorm.
Yes.
When we were 1-0 up. But alas, we actually did lose the replay of that. Then 06-07, the only away win was towards the beginning of the season. We beat Newcastle. That's the one where Jimmy Bullard actually had that horror injury, but we did end up winning 2-1 with Bocanegra scoring an 89th minute goal. The one that really stunned me, where Fulham only won one away game in the whole season, was 09-10, the famous Europa League year. We won one league game away from home on the opening day against Portsmouth. And I just found it mad how much I have positively airbrushed that season. Obviously,
hang on, we won on the final day of the season before against Portsmouth, and then went back the first game of next season.
Because there was the season in between where we finished 7th.
Right, yeah.
So in that season we won a couple of away games. We won one away game in the league. This is Fulham's greatest ever team. Lots of people would say you've got, Prime, Schwarzer, Hangeland, Hughes, Murphy, Zamora, everyone clicking that season. Obviously, we won some big games away from home in the Europa. You think away to Basel and away to Wolfsburg, but in the league once. And when we finished 12th, we won a lot of home games in the league, and obviously, I think in the last
the back half of the season,
there's so much energy was going into the Europa League that
I think if you look at some of the team sheets from the league games in the back half of the season, it starts to add up a little bit more.
But what I just wanted to kind of get your opinion on, I put this in the WhatsApp group, so you've probably seen this, but I felt like Roy. Did he come under any pressure? I want to know I was obviously a big Fulham fan at this time, but I can't specifically remember. Were there Roy out calls when we went on this run of form in the league? We drew 0-0 with Spurs on Boxing Day. We then lost 5 league games in a row. Away at Chelsea.
That was unfortunate. the Chelsea one.
Still,
I have real memories of that game.
Still a loss. Lost away at Stoke, which is the game where Dempsey scored that amazing goal, but it was a consolation. We lost 3-2. We lost away at Blackburn Rovers 2-0. We then lost 2-0 away at Tottenham Hotspur. We then lost 2-0 at home against Aston Villa with Gabby Agbonlahor scoring twice. If we went on that run now, I don't think Marco survives, or there is absolute uproar in the fan base if we went on that run. There would have been probably an FA Cup win or two.
I was going to say, was there any Europa games?
No Europa games. There would have been an FA Cup win or two in that.
Yeah, that maybe does change the picture a little bit.
Which might have softened the blow. But I don't know, maybe.
I think everyone was probably just still riding the high from getting out of the group.
Yeah,
because obviously that was so incredibly dramatic as well.
Yeah,
and we did nothing that wasn't full of drama that season in the Europa League. Like everything had to be difficult.
And we'd beaten Manchester United 3-0 as well just before this run, which was an incredible game where Fulham were brilliant. Obviously people will listen to this and they might have been on, it would have been forums at the time that would have been the main kind of method of communication between the fan bases. I would have just loved to know, was Roy under, because if Marco did that,
I'm going to go back and look through the TIFF archives.
Yeah.
And see what the mood was like in the camp at the start of January in 2011.
Because my initial reaction was thinking, God, we're so reactive now. Not just Fulham fans.
I think that fans are just generally more reactive now. And I think the social media has pushed that so that that reactive comments and reactive things get interactions, and thus, there is, it's kind of a part of it that you sit there. So, hopefully we'll sit here, and to borrow a phrase from Scott Saunders, never too high, never too low.
Yeah. I just found it remarkable. And it's just funny how you do remember the good often in a season. And just, especially like when it was this positive, and the Europa was just such a distraction that year.
What we need is more 5-4s.
Yeah.
People remember that. Someone said this to me the other day. They were like, I'm really enjoying watching Eintracht Frankfurt at the moment. And I was like, that's quite random, but why? And they were like, well, you don't remember 2-0 wins at home. What you do remember is when your team came back from 1-0 down to win 4-3 in the final minutes. He's like, and every single Eintracht game is like that at the moment. I was like, yeah, that's a fair point. They're the games you're going to remember.
And also, it probably goes to show that if Fulham did do something in the Carabao, for example, this season, so much of the league stuff will just kind of be forgotten.
As long as you stay up.
Yeah, as long as you stay up in time, it will all just be dropped and forgotten. But anyway, I enjoy it. It's a really good article from Drew talking about the home form, so do check it out on the Fulhamish website. Right, we'll take a break there. Afterwards, we'll look ahead to Spurs. Jack, it's Black Friday coming up. You're looking to buy some discounted bits and bobs.
Hopefully it'll be black and white Saturday, but let's have a look.
Very nice. Well, My Kind of Cruise have a Black Friday sale. Every cruise on their website discounted. So if you are looking to book your next cruise holiday, maybe you're looking for something for summer 2026, or maybe you want something earlier in the year. If you're looking to book a cruise, you have to go to mykindofcruise.com. You can compare cruises from all over the world, from a variety of destinations, a variety of different length cruises as well. I mean, in terms of the amount of days that you're going on the cruise, not like
the boat size.
Not the boat. I mean, probably you can compare boat sizes as well. Head to mykindofcruise.com or get the app from the Apple App Store or Google Play. And for even more discount, use the code Fulhamish at checkout for an exclusive discount when you use your next cruise. My Kind of Cruise is founded by a fellow Fulham fan. They're the world's first cruise booking app and website. Go check it out, mykindofcruise.com. Use the code Fulhamish for an exclusive discount. Part 2 of the Fulhamish podcast on the Thursday Club here with Jack Collins. I did mention the Fulhamish website before. Please do continue subscribing, either as a free subscriber, you'll get all our articles straight into your inbox. But if you're a paid subscriber, you can get all of our videos advert free. Also, you'll just be supporting all the work that we do here at Fulhamish, and you'll get access to the Fulhamish Telegram group where you can discuss all things FFC 24/7 with our regular Fulhamish listeners. It's a great community to be a part of. Head to fulhamish.co.uk to subscribe, either as a free or a paid subscriber. But everything that we do does stay free and available to all, thanks to those very generous donations from the paid subscribers. Right, Jack, let's look ahead to Spurs on Saturday. Away from home, what an interesting time to be taking on Tottenham. Now, I feel sometimes when you look at games come up like this and you're thinking, oh, isn't it the perfect time to be playing them? quite often it doesn't end up being the perfect time to play them. They've had a really rocky few weeks. After the beginning of the season, everything looked rosy under our good old friend Thomas Frank. Looked like he'd managed to fix a lot of the problems that they had under Ange. However, a lot of it is creaking at Spurs right now. Obviously got battered 4-1 in the North London derby, which is never nice, and they're going to probably watch their great rivals win the league this season. We're recording this before they face PSG. If they have beaten PSG, then I apologise, but I do not see them in a month of Sundays going to the Parc des Princes and beating Paris Saint-Germain. I know stranger things have happened.
They're the exception that proves the rule. They're better away from home.
They're not going to beat PSG. If they've beaten PSG and you're listening to this today, you can send me a tweet and call me an idiot.
Yeah, okay. I look forward to it. No, look, this is a really weird period for Spurs, and they've been pretty dreadful at home all season long, right? Like, it's been part of the malaise that's set in around, I think, the fan base, in that, obviously the majority of fans go to the home games as opposed to the away games. And Spurs have had some really impressive results on the road, right? Like, and they've had some really impressive performances. I thought the PSG game that they played at the start of the season, the Super Cup, they were very impressive. Yeah. You look at the Manchester City game where they executed a game plan to perfection, although they do have a weird hold over Manchester City. In recent weeks, I think the frustration has become, from a Spurs perspective, that they have no real ability to progress the ball through the middle of the park. And part of that is that Thomas Frank has insisted with what I've heard a few Spurs fans refer to as Bentinha, with Bentancur and Palhinha as the two defensive midfielders, both of them who are excellent players in their own right. Obviously, we know what JP can do, but also it's not a midfield that brings loads of confidence in terms of how you're going to progress the ball through the middle of the park, right? One of Palhinha's great strengths at Fulham was that it allowed us to play two midfielders basically in front of him who with more attacking tendencies, who were able to get the ball into those areas, and it let Palhinha do exactly what he's best at, which is winning the ball back and occasionally playing cross-field passes. But the problem is that Spurs have just not been able to find any attacking rhythm through the centre of the park. Now, they've tried to address that in a number of ways. They shift formation in order to bring Xavi Simons into the number 10. He's been good in flashes, but overall, I think slightly disappointing in terms of what we've seen from him from output. Mohamed Kudus has been basically their only threat from out wide. They are struggling to get goals. They are struggling to turn sort of possession into anything meaningful. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out, because that we just said in part one that Fulham are quite poor when we don't have the ball. Spurs are actually better when they don't have the ball. When they're playing on the counter, when they're able to be transitional, I think those are the games that have suited Spurs a little bit more. And that's why their away form has kind of taken an uptick whilst the home form has plummeted. And, if you take out the win over Burnley on the opening day, which looks pretty comfortable, 3-0, when you kind of take it at face value, it wasn't all that comfortable in terms of actually how it played out in terms of the game itself. And I think it's really intriguing to then look at the other games, the Villa game where they have the lead and they're undone, yes, by 2 wonder goals, but also they just completely collapse in on themselves in that period. You look at what's happened of late, the Chelsea game at I was going to say the Lane, but at Tottenham Stadium.
Yeah.
One of the single worst home performances I think I've ever seen from any side. Like, absolutely abysmal. The performances in both the North London derby and that game against Chelsea, which I imagine Spurs fans would point to as, at the very least, two of the most important games of their season. And they've completely crumbled under the pressure of both. Now, if they were to lose to PSG midweek, and obviously, dear listener, you will know what the result of that game is by the time that you're listening to this. But if they lose that, and then Fulham come up at the weekend and get a result, I think Thomas Frank's in real trouble. Like, I think that's the kind of streak of form where they'll be like, I don't know if this is working. Because already you're starting to see the comparisons. Now, actually, for what it's worth, I think that some of the immediate criticism, the immediate praise of Thomas Frank for sorting it all out, I think it was overblown. Yeah. And then I think that some of the criticism coming his way now is probably a little bit overblown as well. Now, that doesn't mean Spurs haven't been awful, right? Like, it doesn't mean that he deserves to be, given grief for some of the performances, especially those two against Chelsea and Arsenal, where Spurs fans, would have been absolutely bang up for both of those games and just seen their team kind of roll over and have their bellies tickled by their two biggest rivals. Like, obviously that's not going to go down well, and totally fair enough. I think that it's going to take time to build an in-possession structure. You're not going to get that off the bat straight away. And Thomas Frank is someone who's coming from a period where he has obviously coached a team in the Championship who were very front-footed, very possession dominant. That Brentford team were very swashbuckling. But since they moved to the Premier League, have become more of a reactive team. It takes time to kind of kick out those tendencies as well from coach and within a player group that he's trying to solidify from a team that just conceded far too many goals last season and were way too open. So he's kind of stuck between the rock and the hard place. But I do think that if Fulham go there, put on a performance, are able to, take it to Spurs through the middle of the park, are able to shut down their wide threats with fullbacks, are able to get in behind the fullbacks with our own wide threats, this is a Spurs side who are under the cosh from a fan base perspective, who are under the cosh from a performance perspective. And if you can take advantage of that and frustrate them, and if you, again, look, I've said this before, but that crowd is ready to go at their own team. They're ready to pay for blood. If you go and take an early lead there, it will be absolutely brutal inside that stadium. And they will let the players know. We've seen it before.
I've just had a horrible realization whilst you spoke brilliantly about Spurs there. Have you maybe worked it out? If we beat Spurs, and that means that Thomas Frank gets sacked, have we cooked our own goose?
Turkey's right for Christmas. Lose the game. Lose the game.
I can't think about anything else now.
Wow, okay. I didn't think about that. For what it's worth, I think Spurs fans will bay for blood. I don't necessarily think the management would make a change that quickly because of what happened in the summer, because of the overhaul, because Daniel Levy departing the club as well. I think that whilst there will be real frustration around the Spurs fan base and there will be calls for his head, absolutely no doubt about it, I don't know if the Spurs hierarchy would be bold enough to make a big call in the summer and then kind of reverse it, especially that there's no international break until, March. And we're going into the busiest and thickest kind of period of fixtures in the entire calendar. I'd be surprised.
Okay.
Let's just move on. We're going to have to move on.
That's not made me feel loads better. In terms of Fulham, well, actually, that's one big thing for Tottenham that's going to be a huge miss for them on Saturday. Christian Romero has picked up his 5th yellow card. Obviously, they've still got some great players in defence. We know that Mickey van der Ven,
top scorer Mickey van der Ven.
Yeah, we know that he's a very, very good defender, and he offers an awful lot. But Christian Romero is their beating heart. He's the captain. He's the one that kind of holds it together. I mean, that is a huge. As soon as I saw that happen in the North London derby, I thought, oh, that's worked out well for us.
Yeah, 100%. I also think it's really interesting that Christian Romero is the way it tends to work together. If you do play the double pivot, which he seems to be stuck on playing at the moment now, whether that changes at the weekend, I don't know. Romero is the one who carries the ball out of the fence and can pick a pass, right? So he's the one that actually opens it up for these Spurs sides. Without him, it feels like they have zero ball progressors in those areas. And so I think that as much as anything else, as much as, he's a brilliant defender, World Cup winner, all of the above, and I think criminally underrated, to be honest, in terms of what he does from a defensive perspective. Actually, the other side of it is what I'm most intrigued by, because without him, Spurs really have looked like they've not been able to build out from the back in any sort of meaningful way. And with him missing for this game, I'm intrigued to see what they do, whether that is to drop in someone like a Bergvall into the midfield duo to try and give them someone in there that's able to get the ball forward in a kind of meaningful way, or if it's someone like a Pape Matar Sarr that comes in and tries to drive with the ball. Those are the two kind of options I think they have, but it forces Thomas Frank's hand. And I think that if sometimes those things work, right? We saw something like Sasa Lukic's bookings give Alex Iwobi the shot in the middle against Wolves, and therefore you kind of look at it and say, well, that worked out really nicely. They run it back against Sunderland, it works again. So sometimes necessity, the mother invention, but also, you kind of fall into something that really works for you. And I think we've seen that from our perspective. If they do end up having to bring in another ball progressor into the midfield and pair them with Palhinha or Bentancur, I imagine it'll be Palhinha. How does that affect them? Does it actually make Spurs better at doing the things that they've been dreadful at all season? I don't know, but I think it's going to be interesting to see how Thomas Frank goes about his business on this one.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to know who Spurs are actually going to replace him with. Because, I mean, I'm
It'll
not...
be Danso.
But Danso's playing already, so then who goes where Danso?
No, because they played 5 at the back against Arsenal.
Right.
Which I very, very much doubt they will play at home against Fulham.
Right.
It will effectively, I think what will effectively happen here is the extra man will come into the midfield. So it will become a 4-2-3-1 or a 4-3-3. Danso will slot in next to Mickey van de Ven. The question is what they're going to do from fullbacks, because Pedro Porro looks already like he's a bit sort of run into the ground this season. They've played Jed Spence at left back quite a lot, and defensively Jed Spence is really, really good in those areas. But from an attacking perspective, I think he really holds Spurs back, and Destiny Udogie gives them far more outlet on the wide spaces. With him in the team, they look like they're able to get down the flanks a little bit more and actually make things happen. If they go Jed Spence, I think that Fulham can afford to be a little bit more aggressive on that right-hand side and try some overloads, because Jed Spence doesn't have the capacity to pass the ball down that channel in the same way that a Destiny Udogie does, because he's right-footed. And how they kind of play that, the issue has been, I think, for Spurs, that they haven't had enough players who can actually hold the ball and bring it into those dangerous areas and combine, right? And actually what you see is when they were playing Richarlison down the left flank, for example, there's no ability for the team to actually get forward and bring the ball into those spaces and make it stick. When they've played, Odebear there and Udogie, they look far more dangerous, by my count, down that left-hand side. If that's what they do, then I think Fulham are going to have to be aware of the threats that poses. Now, Kenny Tete is a wonderful fullback, and this is going to be a big game for him, I think, in terms of shutting down the flow, if that is what happens. On the other side, Cesc is going to have to stand up to Mama Kudus, who is their most attacking and offensive threat. Yes, he flashes rather than kind of shines consistently, but he does feel like the one that can make things happen for this Spurs side. So I think it's going to be very intriguing, but considering we kept a very, very good Sunderland side very much contained last weekend, I feel like Fulham are going to come into this with confidence. And to be honest, for the first time this season, maybe away from home, I'm coming into a game, looking at it and saying, yeah, you know what? I don't necessarily, I'm not going, Fulham are going to win this, but I fancy our chances. And that's a nice space to be in terms of going in there and potentially getting something out of this game that on paper maybe you wouldn't expect. Yeah.
I don't know. I had that feeling before Everton.
Yeah.
I had a feeling like, all right, we've beaten Wolves, Everton are out of form, here we go. So I'm trying, actually, it's hard not to look at the situation and be getting ahead of yourself. And obviously the fact that they're playing Wednesday into Saturday as well should mean that Fulham will be much
keep an eye on the Spurs team tonight and what the changes look like, because I think that will give you a good indication of what happens at the weekend.
Yeah, but at the same time, I've got burnt by getting too excited by these kind of opportunities in the past, but there's no doubting that this is an opportunity for Fulham. When you think about who they've got to play on Wednesday, whether they win, lose or draw, it's not going to be an easy night. It's not going to be a restful night against PSG. They're not going away to Paphos. They're playing a very, very difficult
team to play Paphos these days.
Well,
what's the point in being alive if you can't dream, Sammy?
So yeah, hopefully from a Fulham perspective then, and what we do here, there's a few different lineup things. We talked a lot on Monday about what Marco will do in the centre of the park.
Yeah.
And actually the general consensus of my guests on Monday was keep Iwobi, but bring in Lukic and drop Berger to the bench.
No.
My feeling is keep it as it is. And it's unfortunate for Sasha Lukic that you've been dropped because of 5 yellows, but I thought Iwobi and Berger worked.
Yeah.
And if Sasha has to earn his place back from the bench, he obviously will get his place back when Iwobi goes to AFCON. But for now, I don't see any need to change the winning formula.
No, I would completely stick with it. I thought they got the best out of Berger. I think the 2 best games that Berger has played this season are the 2 games where he's played next to Alex Iwobi, and the Wolves game and then the Sunderland game at the weekend. I think that you stick with that, especially now we're talking about Spurs and having that kind of slight weakness in the middle of the park. And, and the fact is we stood up against a very good Sunderland midfield in there. And I thought we're very much, the dominant force in the middle of the park. I would not change that. Now, also, it gives you options, because if you are chasing the game, then you can swap a Berger for a Lukic and, someone who's a little bit better at dictating the tempo. If you are not chasing the game, you can shift it around and add the kind of steel shield and add that later on in the game. So I think that Sasha Lukic gives you options off the bench. And look, we've spoken about this so many times, but Marco runs a relative meritocracy. I don't think anyone's done enough to displace And look, the last time Sasha played, he very nearly and perhaps should have got himself sent off in the game against Everton. I don't think he gave a glorious account of himself in that game. We looked better once the changes were made. I think you stick as is. Now, whether Marco does that or he reverts to a slightly more defensive tendency away from home, that's a slightly different question, but I hope he doesn't. And I think that what we've seen from the second half of the Everton game, the Sunderland game, the Wolves game, is that Fulham are a little bit better on the front foot. We look like we're better when we're able to dictate the game, as we were talking about earlier. Therefore, I think you stick with it. Now, the only questions I think come from who you end up with in the wide position. So I reckon the rest of it kind of picks itself.
Yeah, that is the next question, really. I would like to see Chukwueze get a start here. I think...
On the left or the right?
On the left.
Right.
So left. I would drop Kevin and bring in Chukwueze.
I'm going to shoot myself in the face. Go on.
I'd bring in Samu. I'd drop Kevin to the bench. I think that Samu just looks at the moment like the player with a little bit more nous. I actually think will suit us starting the game and then bring Kevin on as a weapon against tired legs. I think
we get to sing the Get Kevin on.
And we get to sing Get Kevin. I'm not 100% sure that'll be getting sung quite as loud anymore. Look, I think Kevin's been okay. I don't want to overblow the criticism. He's a young lad. He's come over. He's trying to adapt. It just looks like Samu is a bit more top 5 European League ready, and Kevin is still just finding his way into it. And I think I didn't realise that Samu could be effective on the left wing. We've always known him to be a right-sided option, so it's never been considered before, but he came on the left. He looked absolutely wonderful in that position, really starred there. It just seems like the obvious move to me, and I think we will get the best out of Kevin from cameo appearances at the moment.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that it feels like the move. There also is the thing you can do with, if you do have Samu on that left-hand side, you can kind of flip your wingers at points.
Yeah.
Let's see what Harry Wilson looks like drifting into the middle space. If Josh King drifts out to the left and Samu drifts over to the right, the interchanges.
Samu does not stay in one place.
The interchanges with Iwobi as well, I think are going to be interesting. And obviously there's a bond there already from playing together with the national team. I think that it's probably the right move. I think the criticism of Kevin's been a little bit overblown. I'll be honest. He wasn't brilliant at the weekend, but he also opened up opportunities. I thought that the strike that he had in the first half that we talked about that was well saved by Robin Roofs is good. He works the ball really nicely. He uses Harry as the decoy. He opens it up. Yeah, maybe he should fire it a little bit further towards the corner, but it's still an excellent stop to get down that low to it and with a skidding ball. I think he does almost everything right there. There's the frustration with the one later in the half where he kind of leaves it behind and allows Trey Hume to get back at him. But that's just one of those things, right? Yesterday, Giovanni Di Lorenzo in the Champions League got his studs caught in the turf as he was trying to shoot. Doesn't make him a bad right back, right? Things can happen in those kind of conditions. And yes, obviously you expect him to be a little bit sharper in those areas. That doesn't, and I think the header that's well saved, or the header that probably he should do a little bit better with, but it's coming in over the back of about 4 players. He sees it late. I thought his performance was fine, if I'm being honest, at the weekend. I thought that Samu was excellent. So therefore, by the rules of what we've just set out and the meritocracy aspect of it, yeah, I think you do want Samu to come in there and actually start the game. I think he's earned a start, but I don't think that should speak, it should speak about, Kevin was rubbish, because he wasn't. I think that'd be far too harsh.
No, he's looked so effective off the bench.
Yeah. Bring him on, give him 20 minutes and let him run at
I think actually Kevin's best performance this season wasn't Leeds. I think it was Newcastle away. Yeah. Where he came on in the second half and looked electric.
Yeah.
And it was against slightly tired legs, and I felt like he really brought, and because he bursts onto the pitch and just terrifies defenders. Samu does something similar, but actually I think Samu's
there's a bit more. Is a little bit more guile, I think, associated with Samu's game rather than the kind of raw fury of Kevin's.
Yeah, and look, one day we all hope that Kevin's going to be the absolute first name on the team sheet, scoring Rabonas every single game. That's what we hope he'll get to. But I just think for now, I think Samu makes sense. Obviously, I think Rowe, I don't think there's any discussion as to who's going to be starting up front.
Don't worry, mate. Kusiasari scored for the under-21s last night.
He did. Baby sacks off the mark.
We're away.
So yeah, I think effectively then the team mainly picks itself. Again, clean sheet, so he's not going to change any of the defenders unless there's injuries, which we don't know about yet. Let's dive into some emails. We've had some brilliant emails today, actually, which I really want to get some of your opinion on. This one from our friend Andrew Stanley talking about the changing room clip, which we discussed on Monday's podcast. And Andrew says the changing room clip was to show everyone was supporting the manager. PR clip to make us happy, and it worked. Said, I agree with everything Sarah said. Rowe gets terrible service, and that's the way we play, given decent balls in the box, and he's fine. Do you think it's the service to Rowe?
Yeah, both. Like, as in, we're not a team that swings loads of crosses into the box from, our wingers. The crosses we tend to... Fulham are a relatively high crossing team, right? Like, we've seen that in the stats, the way it plays out. But I think it often tends to be from either, wingers chopping back into those kind of positions where they might shoot or might cross, or they're in-swinging crosses, or fullbacks from deeper positions. And I think that what we saw at the weekend with that Samu cross was a winger going his man on the outside and whipping the ball in from around the edge of the box kind of territory, which I think is, the kind of service that Rowe would like a little bit more of. I think that opens up the possibility to try something like that if Samu does start on the left-hand side against Spurs. But yeah, I mean, the moments that he's had real joy, you talked about the Kevin cameo in the Newcastle game. Obviously, he hits the bar with that one and it ends up being Lukic that scrambles it in. But that's from a good cross from a winger in those kind of positions. I think that the service, you can look at it in a number of different ways. Fulham are not a team that tends to do a lot of what we did at the weekend, and it worked, obviously. There's part of that teams aren't expecting it because that's not Fulham's modus operandi. We've spoken about the fact that Anthony Robinson isn't there at the moment, so we're not seeing that, kind of like dynamic pace down that side, and the ball's being kind of fizzed in from his angle. So perhaps there's a little bit of that lacking at the moment. I also think that Raul isn't, necessarily moving himself into the smartest positions, and one of the things we've always complimented him on is his IQ and his footballing ability, and, where he's able to just give himself a yard of space from a defender. You look at some of the goals from last season, the one at home to Newcastle, where he's just sort of opened up his body, the goal against Nottingham Forest, just getting himself that extra yard. I think there's been a little bit less of that this season, and perhaps that is just fatigue because he's being asked to do so much with the absences around him. But I think that there's probably about 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. I don't think the service has been brilliant to Raul. Equally, I don't think he's doing the best he can with that service either.
Yeah, I also do think Raul is a real streaky confidence player. I'm really hoping that just that scoring feeling will get it back for him. I know he scored against Villa, but I'm really just hoping that he gets this goal. We're relying on him now, right? And we can cry about that we didn't get a good enough second and third striker, but he is the only option now. We know that Muniz is out. I mean, Market was talking about February. Yeah. So we know now that we have to rely on Raul. And sometimes, obviously the player that I've always thought seems to give Raul some of the best service was Adama. He loves those looping crosses, and he scored against Everton that way, and he scored against Forest. I was thinking about the Brentford game away from home, but yeah, you're right. I think it's just about getting that serve, and maybe Samu's found something that can click for Raul. I'm just really hoping that there's a little bit of it's intangible, that feeling for a striker of getting a goal and then I'm confident now. I'm actually going to get myself into those right positions,
especially on the back of a really difficult international break for him as well, right? Like, when he's having to come out and criticise, and whether that's fair or not, I think is up for debate, and I'll leave that to the Mexican football fan base to get stuck into. But I think that it was a difficult international break for him as one of the kind of senior players and leaders within that team. So for him to come back and get a goal, even after a game where he toiled for quite a lot of it, might just give him the little bit of a boost that he needed.
Yeah, and you actually look last season, I was trying to find the stats while we were talking about Raul's runs of goals. So last season, he scored 3 games in a row. It was match days 4, 5 and 6 against West Ham, Newcastle. Forest scored a couple of games later against Villa in the defeat. He also went on a little bit of a run around Christmas where he scored quite a few goals between December and January.
The Arsenal goal, right?
And he scored 2 games in a row, the ones I mentioned, Everton at home and Brentford away. So he does tend to score in little batches. So fingers crossed that's what happens here. Next email from Georgie Brooke. Fine folk.
Nice.
This is what we... Thank you very much, Georgie.
Cheers, Georgie.
Listening to the pod from Tuesday, I felt compelled to offer an alternative view on Kevin. The Sunderland game was not his best shift in the shirt, but I disagree with some of the comments made on the show. There was comments that he's all rainbow flicks and tricks, and can he get his head down and play football? Then another pundit said Cech should start with Kevin as the impact sub. I think those comments miss one of his key strengths. His work rate is great. He covers Cess a lot, a big factor in why Silva picks him, in my opinion. Secondly, and something we see all the time, to get settled on a new country and used to the tempo of the Premier League can take up to a year. He started 3 games. Finally, I believe the reason he was bought here was to link up with Jedi. We've not seen it yet, so it's hypothetical, but I'm excited to see the extra space that Robinson makes for Kevin as he stretches teams. Football is all about opinions and time will tell, but I'm really excited about what I've seen and what's to come. And that's from Georgie.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with most of it. Look, I think that doesn't mean that you can't utilise him as a bench option at the weekend. That doesn't mean that you can't utilise him as a super sub and someone who can impact games late on. It also means that, if at 45 minutes nothing is working, Fulham are able to change it up. And I do think his work rate is a really, really integral part of this. You go back to the game against Wickham, right? And the frustration that we felt with that game was not necessarily with Adama's end product. It was the fact that he didn't feel like he was working back into the right areas to open the game up. Kevin wasn't great that night, right? Like, he was given a relatively torrid time by Jack Grimmer, in fact, and actually
happens to the best of them.
Yeah, it does happen to the best of them. Everywhere you go, always take Jack Grimmer with you. But the way that he worked backwards, I think, gives him a little bit more leeway in the eyes of the fans and also in the eyes of the coach. Because, if he loses the ball and he tracks back 50 yards to make a tackle on his own corner flag, that's something that Marco will be aware of. And I do think that Georgie's spot on with that work rate and the ability. I think that some of the things being thrown around about Kevin is that, it's all rainbow flick. When was the last time you saw him do a rainbow flick? He did one early on.
He did one against Brentford, didn't he?
And then, have we seen that since? It wasn't like he, at the weekend was running the ball out of play by doing 15 step-overs. None of that was why the performance at the weekend wasn't great. The performance at the weekend wasn't great because the ball, fell out of stride when he should have been through on goal, or his effort wasn't good enough, or, the fact is he couldn't get the separation away from someone like Trey Hume, who, to be honest, I really, really rate. But when you're looking at it from those perspectives, that's a different thing to him overplaying. I don't think he's overplaying at the moment. I think, if anything, he might be underplaying a little bit.
That's my thing. I felt like the confidence had gone on Saturday, and there was actually there was a moment in the first half, I couldn't pinpoint it or whatever, and it kind of led to nothing. But I did say to my dad, confident Kevin gives it across there, and he passed it back to, I don't know, probably Berg or something like that. And there was just one moment. I was like, you were like, cross it. Oh, he's passed it backwards. Words I said to my dad was, Marco's worked his magic on Kevin there. And it feels like he's not beating a man. And actually, if you're a fullback coming up against Kevin at the moment, and particularly maybe it just felt like, maybe the ball was getting stuck in the ground. I don't know what it was. It feels like just like stand him up, and he hasn't got that much at the moment to beat. And in those first few games,
he's underplaying, not overplaying. Yeah.
In those first few games, those defenders that he came up against were absolutely terrified because he would knock it round you, he'd knock it past you, run round you, and get to the ball first. Yeah. But I do think that'll
come back with confidence.
Also, it's really hard for a winger starting. It's a different skill to starting games as opposed to coming on in the last 30, 40 minutes against tired legs. Yeah. There is a complete difference, and actually it's very hard to be effective from the start, and sometimes it's a little bit easier to start off the bench. I'm not terribly worried, and actually I'm not either. It's just that there is a fantastic option in Samu who deserves a shot as well, just like Kevin's deserves.
Two things can be true, right? I think Samu should start at the weekend. I also think Kevin's going to be fine.
Yeah. I liked this email from Robert Heath. Hi, Sammy. Thanks for all the great shows. Drew said on the quick take after the Sunderland game that Josh is our creative spark. I know this view is widely held in the fan base as showed by the crowd reaction when Josh came off on Saturday, but I think it's wrong. Josh is a fine young player, looks for the ball, excellent on the turn, particularly in the middle third, and drives forward. But in my view, at this stage of his career, he's not creative enough in the final third for a number 10. I've been at 9 of the 12 league games, and to my recollection, Josh has created too few good goal goal scoring opportunities or taken good positions in the box to score. Indeed, the stats back this up. In the 12 Premier League games, no goals. Okay, should be 1. No assists. His shot count is also not high. Imagine the reaction if Andreas had these stats after 12 games this season. I understand why Josh is loved by the fans. I want him to succeed. He is learning his profession, but I think it's time for Josh to be an impact sub like at Brentford last season when he helped turn the game and give Smith Rowe a run of games in the number 10 position. Grateful for your views. Best regards from Robert Heath.
This isn't something we talked about, and we probably should have talked about within the Sunderland game and then the Spurs preview as well. Smith Rowe's cameo at the weekend helped turn that game around.
Yeah, it did.
I thought he was really, really impressive. Now, what we saw in the Newcastle game was that he was given the start and Fulham looked pretty dull in that first half, right? Like in terms of our attacking impetus. So I can understand why Marco might be a little bit reticent to go and throw him into a game like this, right? And I mean, you can point out the he always turns up against Tottenham narrative. His dad's a Tottenham fan, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So there is that kind of sub narrative, which I don't think we should use over the top in terms of where we're looking at it. But he could also, I think, legitimately go to Marco, knock on the door, and be like, "How do I get a shot?" Because if that cameo isn't enough to give me an opportunity, what else do I need to do? And maybe it's one more really good cameo and he starts the game afterwards, especially when there's 3 games in a week with City, etc. I think it's not necessarily he has to start the weekend. And I don't necessarily agree with everything Robert says there. I do think that he makes a really good point about what the fan reaction would be if this was Andreas. I think that's totally fair. And actually, the way that Josh operates is actually a little bit more like an 8-10 hybrid at the moment. It's not necessarily as a pure number 10, which is often what Andreas was doing. And, we talked about context when we were trying to analyse the stats from what happened last season. And I think that it's a little bit tired to pull up the comparison over and over again. So I'm not going to do that. Well, I do think that Josh does really, really well. And it's not necessarily that final pass, but it is opening up the game. And the half-turn is mentioned there. We talked about it being a little bit Phil Foden-esque a couple of weeks ago, and I maintain that. Like the way that he turns out of trouble and opens up the final third often is the pass that goes out to the wide areas that allows a winger to be one-on-one with their man. Get the ball out to Harry Wilson in those areas. If you look at the ball, beforehand, who is it? It's often Josh.
Yeah.
Right. And look, whether you consider that to be, if it was an assist, if he gave the ball out to Harry Wilson as a 1-2 and then he cuts inside and scores, it's obviously not going to go down as Josh's assist. But I think the fact he's turned out of pressure in the middle of the park and opened it up tends to be something that sometimes gets missed when, the stats are what's being looked at. But I do think Rob has a point, right? Like, and I think that using him as a creative spark is not necessarily fair. What I do think he does is he allows Fulham to transition. He allows Fulham to get into those spaces in midfield and actually be running at the opposition as opposed to knocking it about in our own third. And that I think is his biggest strength right now. He's obviously going to need to add goals and assists to his game going forward if we're going to, if he's going to be utilised as a number 10, if he's going to be the lightning rod for where Fulham are going. But I think there would be a fair argument to make that over the next 2-3 games, and I don't know if that's the Tottenham game, the City game, the Palace game, Emil Smith-Rowe should probably be given a start, much as for rotation, as for the fact that his cameos tend to have been good enough to have justified giving him an opportunity to prove his worth. And also, I do have a bit about not running an 18-year-old into the ground.
Yeah.
Like,
I think that's what Marco's definitely been. I think that's the reason he didn't play against Everton, was for that reason.
I think it's just important to notice. Now, whether that means that Smith Rowe starts or whether that means you actually end up with a kind of Iwobi, Lukic, Berger trio in the midfield with, which is kind of 2 number 8s and a 6, if you will, as opposed to a 6 and a 10, is a slightly different, discussion, but it's one worth having. So I thought it was a good email.
Yeah, and actually, it's interesting you mentioned. I also think that Josh is possibly a slightly better, deeper midfielder, and one that I had been thinking of when, particularly the games during AFCON where Fulham should or could be on the front foot. So I'm thinking probably even just that West Ham game that's coming up at the London.
Are you saying you play someone like a Berger and a King and a Smith Rowe?
Exactly. I'd love to see it. Whether it would work, I don't know. But
yeah,
it could.
Might be a little bit lightweight to play against a West Ham team that's suddenly got loads of energy in midfield.
Yeah, I was just more thinking if, I think if
at home, Yeah, I don't mind it. I don't know if you'd use that. I don't know if you'd utilize it away from home, but I don't mind it at home.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see it. I mean, maybe it's a cup thing. Who knows? Final email from Rowe Simonian said, "Hi Fulhamish. I attended the Fulham Supporters Trust AGM last week. We had football finance expert Kieran Maguire as a guest speaker and his magical football finance spreadsheet that he has been working on for over 15 years. He opened Fulham FC's tab and we had a detailed insight into the club's finances in the 30 or so minutes he was speaking. It was fascinating, encouraging, and humbling in equal measures. The two main takeaways for me were this. The club makes a loss of around £1 million per week, in brackets, not a disaster, he said. Sounds like a disaster. If I was losing £1 million a week, it would definitely be a disaster.
I'd have to have £1 million to lose.
Well, yes, exactly, same. And then he says, ticket revenues generate 10% of the club's income. Rowe says, I think the second point is particularly interesting. The podcast itself has said many times that ticket prices are an insignificant source of income, whilst arguing against the club's ticket price rises in recent years. Whilst I'm a visible supporter of the Stop Exploiting Loyalty campaign, and I do think that prices are too high for single match tickets for regular fans and the price model being aimed at out-of-towners being prepared to pay, I think it's not accurate to say that ticket revenue is an insignificant source of income for Fulham when arguing against price hikes. It's actually the second most significant source of income after broadcasting, according to Kieran. Would love to hear this on the podcast discussed amongst all of you, and thanks for what you're doing. P.S. Kieran should be a target for a podcast guest on Fulhamish. We did have Kieran on 4 or 5 years ago, but yes, obviously Kieran's great.
He comes on the radio quite a lot with me, so we can have a word.
Yeah, and his Price of Football podcast as well is also fantastic. But it would be nice to get effectively what Kieran gave to the Fulham Supporters Trust AGM. It would be probably nice if we could broadcast that as well to the wider fan base in some way. I mean, my view on this, Jack, is I don't think we've ever dismissed that obviously as a line in Fulham's revenue that tickets, and that's obviously why they've done the Riverside. It's highly important what they've done. I think for me, it's the difference between quote unquote reasonable prices and then the extortionate prices they're charging is not that bigger part of it. You wouldn't need to lose all. We're not saying let people in for free. I don't think anyone's ever said that. And I don't think anyone's now of the view that tickets should be £20 anymore. I think we've all realised that...
I am.
Well, but we've all realised everything's gone up in life. And sadly, probably now...
If you can buy a ticket Bayern Munich for €20.
Yeah, but I mean, Bayern Munich's a huge exception right now. I think, I'm very, very happy with £30 for away tickets. And it'd
be great if home prices were the same. That'd be great.
But your season ticket works out at 35, and it's never going to be cheap. It should never be cheaper to buy an individual match ticket than it should be.
That would reduce season ticket. I think that this is a fair point, right? And again, I take your point that no, I'm not saying that ticket prices and the revenue brought in there is insignificant. That's not fair. But equally, 10% is 10%. It's saying that's the second biggest bit behind broadcasting rights. Okay, so what's broadcasting rights? 70? 80?
Yeah, well, it's huge.
So, if we're talking about it in those kind of regards, then I think that you can put it like this. If you're going to charge extortionate prices for the Riverside stand, and look, we saw the tickets come out for Man City at home, right? There's tickets in the Riverside stand at £160 a pop, right? For a single seat, not in hospitality, just a seat in the Riverside stand. Now, one, those seats aren't going to sell out, and two, I've got another point about Crystal Palace in a minute. We'll come back to that. But okay, if you're going to utilize those, then subsidize it, right? If you're going to charge that kind of money for the hospitality packages, for the fancy seats that are heated and come with blankets and all of that crap, then subsidize the Hammersmith end, because you can't have one side of the stadium where you can buy seaweed crisps and all of these bits on the bottom of it, and the other side where you have to wade through puddles of piss to have a wee. Those two things don't add up, I'm afraid. And you can't be, because at that point you're talking about second-class citizens, and I'm sure the club wouldn't want to hear that, but that's effectively what they're doing. And I think that if you're putting those kind of perspectives in place, you've got to have a level then that you're going, okay, if you're going to sit in that stand and the facilities are not up to scratch and you can't, it's really difficult to get a pint at half time and the toilets are grim and all of those things, then you have to subsidize those prices, because you can't be charging 70 quid to sit in the Hammersmith end and then having that compared to what you're getting in the Riverside. That doesn't add up to me. And so, look, I'm firmly in favour of the club being able to utilise the Riverside stand for daily activities and events and conferences and all of that. I think that's smart, right? Like, I'm not sitting here complaining about it. I'm not sitting here complaining about the fact that there's a members club in there. Like, all of that is fine as far as I'm concerned. I don't care because it doesn't impact me, right? Those are the things that happen.
And doesn't impact the wider fan base either.
No. So, and I think, I can speak for maybe not everyone, but for most people in terms of that not being something that impacts us. But when you see the kind of differences between how people are treated in two sides of the same stadium, and the prices don't add up in the same kind of way, I think that's when you can sit there and have a serious issue with it. Look, I do think that, to go back to the second point about Palace, right? That's not a local derby, but a London derby, right, against Crystal Palace. It's a big game. It's a game that, obviously had serious impact on our season last year. It's a game that Fulham will be hoping to win at home. And the club have given out free tickets left, right and centre for people living in the area to try and, apologise for the idea that there might be concerts at the cottage next summer. And the fact that there are fire alarms going off at the construction works.
These fire alarms did sound quite, I don't know if you've heard about this, but yeah, they're giving away free tickets as an apology. For...
We should be selling out Palace at home, I'm afraid. Like, that's a game that really, really matters.
Yeah.
And the fact is that if you look at the ticket pricing there, if that was, I'd say £10 off from each adult who are sitting there, I think it sells out. I don't think it sells out the current pricing. And that's why I think it's, they're like, we'll just give away tickets to, everyone in the local area and it will look more full and there'll be seats on, bums on seats. I don't understand how that is considered in line with a strategy that is like, 10% of our revenue comes from ticket price. Well, you're giving them away.
Yeah,
those two things don't add up to me.
But that's the only thing I would say about that. Yes, it's interesting. I didn't realize it was as high as 10%. I guess my thing is that, as you say, if you reduce £10 off of most tickets, would it make that big a difference to the 10%?
Do you sell 10% more?
Yeah,
that's what I mean. Like, as in, if you sell out every game at £10 less, would the current just take £10 off every ticket, just in the ground, full stop? Mm-hmm. And then if you look at the numbers in terms of attendances, I'd just like to see the experiments. Right? If they come back and they're like, it didn't work, we made less money, I'll be like, fair enough. You know what? Hands up. It really didn't matter to enough people that that's what it was. But like, I don't know if you can know until you experiment. And ultimately, when was the last time you saw the cottage sold out?
Yeah, I mean, it was technically, I think they said it was sold out for Sunderland. It certainly wasn't every seat in the ground looked full. The only thing I think was also, just we've gone a little bit over on this, that I wanted to say is that if Fulham actually sold out, there's actually opportunities for Fulham to make more money because the ticket exchange opens. And on the ticket exchange, the club makes more money when a season ticket holder gives up their seat.
Yeah, because they sell it back at general public.
And they sell it back at general face value. That's how lots of clubs... So actually, by lowering the prices, you sell out and then you can sell more tickets from the season tickets who are giving up their seats because they want to put them back on the exchange. They can't go, yeah. So actually, in some ways, it could make up more money. My thing is that, like, I really respect the email from Rowe and obviously love the work that Kieran does, but does dropping the ticket prices, it might change it from 10% to 9.9.
Yeah.
And... okay, for me, that doesn't feel like huge price to pay when we're already losing £1 million per week. It's going to be £1,005,000. I don't know. It's just going to be a very insignificant sum when we're talking at that level. But anyway, we'd love to get Kieran on and discuss this more with them at some point. Jack, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sammy. It was a pleasure.
If you're going Spurs, enjoy that long old trudge up the Seven Sisters Road.
I was saying this earlier. If you're looking for someone to drink and you don't want to be around Tottenham Stadium, and I can completely understand why, go like Finsbury Park and then just get like a bus or a taxi up the Seven Sisters Road. Go to like the Fortering Bullback, or there's a couple of decent pubs around there.
Yeah, it is a tricky one. It is a tricky one to get right, Tottenham. I always just think...
I like the old shillelagh. but I appreciate that not everyone does.
It's also about 1 million miles from the ground
itself. It's a
10-minute tab. If you have any good tips, no doubt there'll be a few people in the Fulhamish Telegram group discussing ideas. Jack, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sammy. It was a pleasure.
And thank you very much for watching and listening. Have a great weekend. You whites.
You whites.